Okay. Well, once again, welcome to our podcast, which is run by Neil and Pratik. And today we have an extremely special guest. And this guest is not just a normal guest. This is a guest who has been family to me, who has been a friend to me, and who has been a true friend throughout the number of years I've contributed to this industry as in market research. He has been there along with me. And I'm extremely proud to be having this conversation about a topic, a wonderful common topic that we talk about. Is AI going to take the space of humans, or are the humans, with the help of AI, take the space of? So we'll be breaking this conversation. So I'll let Doug introduce himself quickly, and then we'll get on with our conversation. Doug, over to you.
Thanks, Steve and Neil. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation today. I'm Doug Guion. I currently work at a generative AI company called Yabble. In my background, I spent about 10 years on the global panel side at the early start of the industry in the late 90s. I spent 10 years operating market research companies. After that, and the last 8 to 9 have been in B2B SaaS, disruptive tech, and AI. So I'm looking forward to this conversation because I come with a lot of personal experience in all sort of aspects of the space.
Great. Good to have you on board. And Doug, let's get started immediately. We have been talking about, and I know personally you're not in agreement with the word called faster and cheaper. Now, AI was supposed to give faster and cheaper results. What is your story behind it? What do you think about AI to be, rather than just faster and cheaper?
Specifically related to market research or market research?
Yes.
Well, I think they're the two least interesting parts. They're certainly faster and cheaper, but that mantra has been used since 99 when I started at a company called Greenfield Online, when the internet first sort of was introduced to data collection. What's different about AI is it isn't just a new way of producing market research. It isn't just a better or faster or cheaper way of producing the same thing in a new vein. It's an entirely new type of technology, which means the value proposition behind market research is changing. The value proposition that practitioners of market research or service providers around market research can offer is fundamentally changing, because the buyers of research can now do a lot of things themselves that they couldn't do before, which doesn't mean that researchers aren't valuable. It just means they need to learn a new way of finding and creating value. So I think the most interesting thing about the advent of AI vis-a-vis market research is researchers are finally going to be unburdened from the cognitive load of having to do task after task that in and of itself isn't valuable, but it's necessary for the ultimate delivery. Now, many of those tasks can be offloaded, which frees the researcher up to do more than they ever could before. And I think those who embrace that are going to find the greatest benefits from AI. And I actually think that's the most interesting thing that's happening now.
Where you stand in terms of the synthetic data and AI personas, because for some you ask, and it's kind of the future, and for others internally in the panel world or the supplier world, I'd say, where it could be a disaster or slow motion disaster for research validity. But where do you come down on that question?
Sure. I have a very definite perspective on that. But first, some context. I divide what's being currently talked about as synthetic data, panelists, respondents, whatever. I divide it into two different modes of thinking. One is fake people, and the other are AI-powered personas. And by fake, I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I just mean the reason that online surveys or surveys were created were to extract information from humans in a way that's projectable into a population that reduces bias. So AI comes along, and what do people do? They think in the respondent metaphor, and they say, well, I can now do that faster and cheaper. Why don't I create AI generated people, and I can now replace respondents? So AI isn't a person. Asking it to do that trick, what it does is it confuses the difference between it. Think about it in terms of sources of light. When the candle first came out, it was the source of light, or the torch with the cave person for 20,000 years. And then electricity happened, And what they did is they made the bulb flicker to look like a candle because it made people more comfortable. But it isn't a candle. It's an entirely different source of light. And they're so fundamentally different, you should think about them in different ways. I personally don't think that synthetic respondents or digital twins or synthetic panels are going to last, because I think they are rooted in the past and they're trying to pander to what people understand. What I think is interesting is using AI to create frameworks that you can interact with. So it's not trying to recreate a digital twin of Neil or 50 respondents in your hard to reach survey. It's creating what people do now with segmentation, right? There's clusters of the population I want to interact with, but you can now do that in 5 minutes as opposed to 6 weeks. And you can do it for $1,000 instead of 150,000. And it can be evolutionary, and it can be always on, and it can learn new things. So what I think is interesting is an adaptive evolutionary segmentation framework, AI-powered persona frameworks that can live and grow with whatever organization or brand you are, that can be fed with data that now sits digitally dusty in some SharePoint directory, as well as real world data that's coming in the global data sphere. The only other bit of context that's important is when we're talking about this, everyone naturally defaults to thinking about a large language model. So they immediately proffer ways that a large language model would fail at it, has failed at it. They are concerned about bias and training data, and all of those things are completely accurate. And I agree, which is why you shouldn't let a large language model do it. But a large language model is one light source in a room filled with switches. It's not the only switch in the room, right? It's very good at certain things and not at others. So there is a way to do it that does not rely on large language models or have to accommodate for its frailties and its failures while still providing good results. I think that's very, very important.
Also, just to understand, I mean, at this point of time, the AI tools that are being built are predominantly very much Western cultured or English language, but we are spanning a lot of research over the globe. I mean, it's not like, there's only a specific area that we're covering. It's over the globe that we're looking at research. So what, according to you, are the blind spots that you think are being missed out at this point of time? Because AI knows what it knows and it doesn't know what it doesn't know. So what do you kind of fill in on that?
Sure. Two things. First, you're doing what is very normal, what most people do. You're speaking about AI in the singular. AI is good at this. AI is bad at that, which is like saying you can't trust communication or you can't trust transportation. Like that doesn't have any meaning without a specific application. So AI is the parent of many children. It's a parent category. So when you're talking about AI, it's very important to be talking about what kind of application are you using. If you need to drive through a muddy bog and you take a two-door sedan, you're going to have a bad experience. If you take a vehicle that's specifically built for those conditions, you'll have a very different experience, right? So first and foremost, it's very important to be talking with specificity because language matters here. So, that's first and foremost. Point being, what you're talking about inherent is a large language model's bias because it's been trained largely on Western data, right? So yes, there are many studies which show the bias that come from training data of any large language model, which is again why companies who are spending lots of time building their own or relying exclusively on LLMs, or companies who are building front doors to LLMs, are going to continuously have to fight the bias battle. Instead, what you can do is you can use something called retrieval augmented generation. It's called a RAG approach. So if you're talking about the Japanese market or Sudan or Egypt or Germany, you're going to find sources that have information relevant to that market. So the context of, or even more broadly than that, right? Like Western Europe or Southern Africa, you're going to retrieve information that's contextually relevant to that particular place so that the frameworks that are created from that are imbued with information that's useful, that has cultural nuance. However, this is where human on the loop is critical, because what the AI is extremely good at is retrieving information quickly, synthesizing that, doing desk research in moments, whereas it would take us a month or two. It's just much better at that we are. However, it doesn't replace someone with a great deal of cultural nuance or expertise who can then take that information, probe it, sort of push and pull and find where it's good, where it's missing, and what additional questions should be asked. So I really do see that question more as the need to develop and articulate the partnership that practitioners will build with different AI technologies so that they can get an optimized result with a high degree of confidence. I agree. I think this should never be about replacing the researcher or the instincts that have helped research be good because of experience. It has everything to do with those researchers not thinking about AI as a singular or a binary, well, I asked AI and it told me this and it was right or wrong. Like, if you think about it that way, you will be right some of the time, you'll be wrong a lot of the time, and you'll be confused all of the time, right? So I think what is valuable is for the practitioner to say, I now have walked into a showroom filled with cars. What's the right car for this particular task? Let me evaluate my overall research question. What stage of evaluation am I at? Am I writing a brief? Am I looking for human insight? Am I synthesizing information and insights that I've gotten? Am I responding to questions? Like, the answer to which technique you should use or which car you should get in is always going to be relative to where you are in your current evaluation. What's new is you now have a showroom, whereas before you had a series of IDIs or you had focus groups. And if you didn't ask a certain question, you couldn't get an additional answer. You couldn't probe past what you hadn't acquired unless your intuition as a researcher and your experience could help sort of borrow from that. Now you can iterate in 10 to 20 minute chunks. So you can use an AI technique to gain information, which raises a new hypothesis, and you can now go chase that down. So you can accomplish months of work in a day or two by intelligently combining different AI techniques or approaches to be able to answer your question. So I do think intuition and experience is important. It'll just be applied differently.
And if you look at the situation, if you use the right tool for the right purpose, your output is much better. And that is also meaning that today humans are getting very intelligent too, not about intelligent how to solve the problem, but how to put in the right prompt. So how do you put the right prompt in? What would be so today, if a good brand manager who's been in the business for a while uses the right prompt, could get answers for any kind of concept or whatever within a few hours, which